In 2022, JetBlue announced they wanted to buy Spirit Airlines for $3.8 billion.
$3.8 billion buyout, the combined airline would become the fifth largest in the nation.
But if this merger doesn't go through, one of the airlines may end up going out of business because they're having so much financial problems, and the federal government is not excited about this merger.
Today, the Department of Justice filed a civil antitrust lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts to stop the merger of JetBlue and Spirit Airlines.
Initially, when JetBlue proposed to buy Spirit, they told the U.S. government because they had overlapping routes, they could make flights more full, more efficient, and therefore reduce the prices. Which makes sense if you're a government for the people, then an airline saying to you, hey, we have a way that we can reduce the cost for the people in your area so they can travel cheaper. That obviously is what you'd want to hear if you were a government official representing the people. That is what you'd want to hear. They said by being bigger, they'd be able to compete with airlines like American, Delta, and United.
There are 4 carriers that dominate 80% of the market share. JetBlue wants to have the opportunity to more effectively compete with those legacy carriers.
Now, the media usually refers to those as the big 3. You'll typically hear flight crew and cabin crew and airline crew in general refer to those as legacy airlines. But what's important to know is that anytime that there is a merger, meaning one buys the other, the U.S. government has to sign off and say that's acceptable, and that is because they're looking out for the best interests of the people in order to have competition, in order to keep the prices down. This is directly from the Department of Justice website, where it states, the Department of Justice Antitrust Division is responsible for enforcing the federal antitrust laws, and we have the authority to review mergers to determine if they may lessen competition. Antitrust laws put into terms for someone like me to understand, essentially what it means is the government doesn't want there to be only one choice for you as a consumer. Because let's say I had an airline and I had the rights to fly inside the US and I was the only airline that could fly you around the US. That means if you came onto my airline, I could charge you whatever price I wanted because there's no one else trying to compete with me. So your only other option would be to like drive or ride a camel or a cow or a horse or whatever you wanted to do to get there. But if you wanted to go on a plane, I could charge you whatever I wanted. It could be good service, it could be terrible service, but no matter what, you're riding on my plane if you want to get on an airplane. And I can charge a lot and I can make a ton of money. But for you, the consumer, it's not really a good idea. So this Department of Justice put these laws in place to prevent that from happening in America, which is known as antitrust laws. And this section of the Department of Justice makes sure putting 2 airlines together like Spirit and JetBlue isn't going to reduce the competition. And obviously, if you have 2 airlines and you make them one, you're essentially reducing the competition. But what their idea is the airline will say to the government, hey, look, yes, I know we have 2 airlines, we're making them one, but by doing that, we're going to be more efficient. We can condense staff and make flights more full and therefore reduce the cost to the everyday person that's trying to catch a flight somewhere. And that makes sense. If you were to combine 2 different companies together, you could take the best from both, make it more efficient, and therefore have a more efficient flight and a more efficient way to travel inside the US or domestic or international or wherever you're trying to go. Those 2 airlines together could be better, hypothetically. All was going well with this merger until this article dropped. Someone forgot to properly black out some of this information, and allegedly it says, internal company estimates the fares on Spirit planes could go up by as much as 40%. Whoopsie. Remember, when they told the government that they were going to come together, they were going to reduce their costs. So it makes you wonder, if they're saying they have to increase their costs by 40%, what is the condition of Spirit Airlines in all this? That means they're operating 40% cheaper than JetBlue, or are they actually in financial trouble? But when the CEO of JetBlue was asked about it and how it will impact people and the cost of the airlines, I didn't see anything saying that he said the cost would go down. But according to this article on law.com, he referenced the JetBlue effect.
Nobody said JetBlue would ever survive, right? And now they're trying to copy us.
Yeah, I think in the biggest sense, the JetBlue effect is how the industry has responded to what JetBlue has brought on the scene.
And that was from a research paper done in 2013 at MIT. MIT is a school where people go who are super smart and learn how to do really cool things. Like one of the things they learn how to do is design airplanes so they're more efficient. That's where smart people go. Other people like me end up going to flight school. In this paper from 2013, they explained the JetBlue effect as In 2012, the presence of JetBlue Airways reduced average one-way airport fares by about $32. And later it states, JetBlue is now the airline whose presence is associated with the largest decrease in average fares. The thing to remember about this is that JetBlue in 2013 was still a newer airline, not a new airline, but a newer airline. So keep this in mind. If you were starting a new airline, let's say you were going to go into Atlanta. If you went into Atlanta, which is the big hub for Delta, you wouldn't take the exact same service and the exact same price of what Delta is doing. You'd have to go in there and make a better service or a cheaper service or do something to win over some of the people that would normally go on Delta. And then in doing that, you now have people that are like, oh, this JetBlue, this is pretty cool. I really like this. I saved some money, or it was a better experience, or whatever it was. If they went into Delta's market in Atlanta and just delivered exactly the exact same product that Delta was delivering, nobody would go over there. They'd say, oh, it's the same price. I'll just stick with Delta. I know Delta. Why go try this thing I don't know? JetBlue? No, I'll just stick with the airline that I know. But if you're JetBlue, you're obviously going to reduce the cost in order to get in there to get people to have an experience on your airline, enjoy the flight attendants, enjoy the pilots, enjoy something about that experience. And then once you start to build that clientele of people that enjoy flying on your airline, you're going to want to make some actual money because you might be doing all that reduced cost or better experiences at a discount that's causing your airline to be losing money. So once you start to get those people, you need to increase the cost in order to not run out of money. And that is shown exactly what happened here in the exact same MIT article, where it says in 2007, the Southwest effect was highly significant. And later in that same article by 2012, it states, the presence of Southwest Airlines is no longer associated with as much of a reduction in average airport fares. So my suspicion is that now in 2023, if the MIT people did that exact same research, they'd find that that JetBlue effect is probably kind of similar to what happened in 2007 with Southwest. Because they're a bigger airline, they have a brand, people know it and have a good experience. They don't have to come into a market and then reduce their fares as much as they used to because people have a good experience with them and they enjoy flying with them. So they see JetBlue is flying in their market and think, oh great, I love JetBlue. I'll go and jump on that airline. But combining two airlines together can be a positive, because if you have two airlines that are starting to struggle and you push them together, you can consolidate staff, which means some people will lose their job, but the airlines are not going out of business, which is a lot worse. So by consolidating their gates, staff, businesses, buildings, and all those type of things, they can actually make it a more efficient and more successful airline and not have as many economic problems as if they try to fight each other out. Does that mean costs will go up for the everyday consumer? Probably. The other problem is that the JetBlue and Spirit business models are not the same. Inside some of the JetBlue planes, there is first-class seats that they call Mint, and I've never been on one, but I guess some of them lie flat. JetBlue also has in-seat, in-flight entertainment and free Wi-Fi. Spirit has none of those things. Well, kind of. They do have in-flight boxing, which is no additional charge on some of their flights. And sometimes you can even catch some of those boxing matches in the terminal before you even get on the plane to make waiting for the plane a lot less boring. So it's a different type of in-flight entertainment, and honestly, it's a lot better than watching Hangover for the 10th time. And this isn't to rag on Spirit. I used to ride Spirit all the time when I had to jump seat places when I was at the regionals. If I had the choice between a lot of different airlines or Spirit, I always chose Spirit. The gate agents were super nice to me. The flight crew was always super nice to me. The cabin crew was always super nice to me. I really enjoyed flying on Spirit, me personally. But that doesn't mean that the everyday consumer is. The complaints at Spirit have been a bit high lately. The other thing that's important to realize is that Southwest and JetBlue are in this category of low-cost carrier, while Spirit and Frontier are more categorized as something like an ultra low-cost carrier. That would be something like what Ryanair is in Europe. Typically, your ultra low-cost carriers are going to have people with smaller budgets that need to get there as cheaply as possible. They don't need any frills. They don't need water or snacks, which is, you pay a lot for the tiny little bag of peanuts that you get now, but it's a different experience overall when you fly on an ultra low-cost carrier or a low-cost carrier or a legacy airline. It's a different experience on all of them, and the costs are typically different. If you would have asked me several years ago who's going to do well in a recession, I probably would have told you an ultra low cost carrier because their costs are really low. They don't really have to change their business model if we get into a recession, and people are going to always be able to move for a cheaper cost. However, that's not the case, and that honestly really surprised me. In the third quarter of 2023, just released, Spirit had a net income loss of $157 million. And you can see here their year-to-date loss is approaching $264 million. Now, when I first saw that, I thought, okay, well, maybe this is one of those things where the airline is showing that they're at a loss so that way they can not pay taxes, because anybody who's watched anything on TV knows that sometimes large businesses will do different strategies in order to save money on taxes by showing that they made a loss. So I thought maybe that was the case. But I pulled up the stock price just before I shot this video, and as of the time right now as I'm recording it, the stock is down 78% on a long-term trend. You'll notice that the stock price now is about where it was during COVID. And if you remember, COVID was at a very, very low time with the airlines. Everybody thought the world was ending. I was flying all the time, but most of the people that were flying passengers weren't going anywhere, and everybody thought these airlines are definitely going to close or go bankrupt until the government started spending tons and tons of money. You might be wondering if Spirit carries freight like some of the other large airlines do in order to offset some of their costs and increase their revenue. But typically the domestic carriers that are running those short flights don't get those contracts. A lot of those contracts go to the legacy airlines that are doing longer flights, international and things like that. It's cheaper for them if you're doing a relatively short flight to use a ground transport or use some other carrier in order to move that. It's just a lot cheaper. You might get there a little slower, but it's a lot cheaper than paying for belly freight on an airline. So since Spirit doesn't have the ability to get this cargo freight, their only thing they can do is increase their revenue by getting more passengers on their flights. And the problem is that with their customer base, they're dealing with people typically on fixed incomes or lower income, and those people are being affected the most by all the inflation that was caused from all the stimulus money that got pumped out several years ago that sent the prices up really high. So now you have a group of customers who are having a tighter budget because food, gas, cars, houses, rent, all that stuff has gone up a lot. And so what happens is the extra money that you have, your discretionary spending, is now depleted. And so you're thinking, well, maybe I won't take that trip to Vegas or to Miami or whatever, and I'm just gonna have to sit at home and not do that. So that customer base, that revenue that typically Spirit generates, is not coming in. Looking at the Spirit revenue line here, you can see the last 3 months in 2023 is quite a bit less than in 2022, but the overall Spirit revenue is still up on the year in comparison to 2022. And what that says in the beginning of 2023, people were still spending money like in 2022, but somewhere in the last few months, people realized, I don't have any money to spend. Everything is costing so much more. I'm running out of savings. My credit card debt is going out the roof. I don't have the money to spend to take that trip with you and your friends down to Cabo for the weekend. That money is gone, so we can't do that. The other major problem that Spirit has is just like UPS. Their operating costs of the airline have gone up in the last 9 months compared to the previous year. I originally thought that the fuel cost might be the big jump, but it's not. You can see here fuel costs are down compared to 2022, and this is the scary part. When I looked at these costs, the biggest jump in cost compared to 2022 is this line right here, salary, wages, and benefits. It's up almost 30% more than this time last year. And then I found this article online saying they agreed to raise the pilots' compensation up 34%. And before you say, oh, these greedy pilots, the airline had to do that. Right now, all the carriers are fighting for pilots. So as they fight for pilots, what's happening is all the pilots are going to the job that's going to pay them the most. Everybody, you watching this video, if you had another company that was offering you 20% more, a lot of times you'd be going, yeah, 20% more, I'll take that. So they'll leave. So what Spirit's trying to do by increasing their wages for their pilots is keep them, because it costs a lot of money to train a pilot. $50,000 to $100,000 depending on the airline and all that stuff, but 50 to 100 grand, that's a lot of money to spend on someone and then have them leave 6 or 12 months later. So all the airlines are fighting for these pilots to try to keep them on property so they can keep flying their planes. So that's why they had the raise. But the terrible news here for these crews is the bookkeepers are going to look at these costs and see what they can do to cut costs, because the revenue isn't going up. And if you were a bookkeeper, where's the first place you'd look? My guess is right here. So just like UPS, Spirit's had a huge surge in their overall costs and labor and things like that, and now they have a downtrend of revenue. Now, there are some other factors. They've had some planes parked, they had some problems with some engine manufacturer issues, so there are some issues there, but it doesn't really matter. You can complain all you want, but at the end of the day, your revenue's down, your costs are up. There's no way to make that a long-term viable way to be running a business. And the other problem that Spirit is facing is that even if the government does approve this merger, there's something else that can kill this deal. It says right here the merger can become unilaterally terminable by either JetBlue or Spirit after July 24th, 2024, which is really only a few months away. And what that means is that let's say the merger goes through, the government says, yeah, okay, or they draw it out like everything at the government, it just takes forever to get anything done. If they get through 2024 and July 24th of 2024, JetBlue could say, hey, look, your revenue is down, the economy looks a lot worse than we thought it was going to be when we offered to pay you $3.8 billion, so actually, never mind. And they will have to pay a penalty. They promised Spirit some money, whether the deal went through or not, but the accountants will look at the numbers and say, hey, it doesn't make sense anymore to pay that amount of money for you. Let's just see what happens with the economy. And then they could end up getting those planes a lot cheaper. Or if Spirit starts to offload pilots, because they just recently announced that they actually suspended the hiring of all pilots and cabin crew, they could end up letting some of those people go, and JetBlue could have a crack at some of those guys to get them to come onto their airline. So it's getting a little bit crazy. Here's the other part. Besides paying the $3.8 billion, if JetBlue buys Spirit, they're going to have to convert all the paint jobs and interiors to match what JetBlue has. And as you can imagine, doing something like this is not cheap. My guess is that in the next 12 to 18 months, there's going to be a very different economic landscape that's going on in the airlines than what's going on today. Now, I'm not a financial advisor. I barely finished high school. But my suspicion is that you'll start to see some of the ultra low-cost carriers and possibly low-cost carriers changing their business model in order to be able to get and retain customers to get their revenue to go up. And they're probably going to have to start increasing fares because their labor costs went up. Just like a lot of people got raises, at the end of the day, the costs and the revenue have to be increased. Otherwise, the airline's not going to be able to stay in business. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.